Houthi attacks on the Red Sea shipping trade is spiralling out of control.
Appeasing the Houthis today will not lead to a more stable Red Sea.
The group has a stranglehold over one of global trade's true choke points, where an estimated $1 trillion worth of goods transits every year. Seen by some as a part of the resistance against Israel's conflict with Gaza, the group has demonstrated they're as focused on domestic issues and looking for legitimacy on the world stage.
يقول للكل في كل العالم لا مشكلة عليكم في المرور والعبور من البحر الأحمر. المستهدف فقط وبشكل حصري السفن المرتبطة بإسرائيل.
Zoom out from the conflict for a moment and go back to your new Nikes. Take a second to think of how our system of global commerce truly works. Most of the things you wear, most of the technology you use, is made in Asia. If you live in this part of the world, nearly all of that comes on a ship through the Red Sea, where all of this is happening. An estimated 50 ships a day cross into the Red Sea and transit the Suez Canal. Since October, more than 50 attacks have taken place on ships. The sinking of the Ruby Mar, a ship with thousands of tons of fertiliser on board, signalled the beginning of a new chapter, with just days later, the first deaths following a missile attack on a ship.
And we will continue our own attacks, and because we feel that it's a kind of an honor to help our brothers in Palestine. If they stop their aggression in Palestine, in Gaza, we will stop too.
The economic impact on the area is clear, with an 82% decrease in container tonnage in February from its 2023 peak. Revenues for the Egyptian government authority that controls the canal are down between 40 and 50% so far this year. So what is a shipping company to do? Well, effectively, it finds another way. Many companies who are now avoiding the region are taking the long way round. So your Nike shoes are now going from Vietnam to the coast of Africa and then turning south rather than heading north to the Red Sea.
And I think what we're seeing is that shipping's pretty risk averse. We're seeing a lot of rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope. And that's really interesting, actually, from someone who's interested in these things, because that adds 2 to 3 weeks on the sailing time from, say, China to Northern Europe or China to East Coast North America.
A look at the Maersk website will now tell you that the trip will take around 38 days. It adds thousands of nautical miles to every single journey, stretching delivery times by weeks.
If you slow down a supply chain, basically you need more ships and more containers to carry the same amount of cargo, because the cargo is spending longer in the ship and longer in the container. The instant effect of rerouting ships has been essentially on freight rates.
So does this mean that the Houthis are winning and the end of global trade is near? Well, not quite.
Well, the irony is that what's bad for supply chains is good for shipping. So, because the freight rate goes up and shipping lines make fantastic profits. So, the slowing down of supply chains work wonders for the profitability of the likes of Maersk and MSC.
Fitch, the ratings agency for financial markets, estimates that the rate of shipping is up as much as 150%. As an example, if you want to get goods sent to a port in the Red Sea, the price has risen from $750 to $6,800 for a 20-foot container.
I hate to say it, but it's been good news for shipping lines, because there was the massive boom during the pandemic when freight rates went up enormously, and they had fallen down to very low levels, such that Maersk was basically wondering, or had been making some redundancies, basically trying to cut its costs.
The situation is bleeding Egypt's economy.
Suez Canal, they used to collect $700 million per month from revenues. Now traffic is down by 55-60%. That immediately affects a country that is already facing difficulties.
An economy that revolves around 3 major pillars: the Suez Canal, tourism, and fossil fuels like gas and petrol. All 3 are affected by this conflict. The tourism industry is expected to shrink by as much as 30%. It's worth around $13 billion and employs 3 million Egyptians. Prime Red Sea resorts such as Dahab and even Sharm el-Sheikh in the south of Sinai are in the firing line of Houthi missiles and drones aimed at Israel. The Suez Canal operations is worth up to 10% of Egypt's GDP. The revenue made from the canal made $9.4 billion last financial year, and it's down as much as half. The crisis also offers a view on a world without the Suez, in a region historically plagued by turmoil and foreign interference.
To be honest, I think the world would carry on pretty normally even if the Suez Canal's not there. Well, it would be a disaster for some of the ports in the Mediterranean, of course, like the port of Suez, for example. It would clearly have massive local impact, but at a global level, I don't think it's the end of the world.
For the likes of the Nike sneakers, whether they are shipped through the Bab el-Mandeb or around the Cape of Good Hope, they will still arrive just a little bit later. However, uncertain times are seeing the recategorization of how supply chains work and adapt, becoming thinner and more flexible. Nike has undergone the new model of nearshoring, effectively bringing production closer to its major markets. The sportswear giant opening in textile-rich areas such as Ara in eastern Turkey, to the excitement of politicians and European consumers.
So basically, what automation and digitalization does is to make production more mobile. And if it's more mobile, it makes sense to get it closer to where the consumers are. I wouldn't say that globalization has run its course completely, but it's certainly the case that in some sectors we're seeing a little bit of rearrangement of supply chains such that distances are indeed a little bit shorter.
The bleak reality is that globalised production needs certainty. International conflict at a shipping chokepoint threatens that. Some are concerned the crisis in the Red Sea will raise global inflation and impact the cost of living, with little mention for the impacts it has on the region itself.
Look, I think to understand this, you've got to look at a lot of deep power inequalities across the world. You know, the idea that you can have a country that is as poor as Yemen and that has been historically sort of put down as much as Yemen. Now, I think within that we can see a really clear message about how power hierarchies are structured. And I think the idea that you can have that sort of view of the world and then assume that you can sail your Amazon packages and your Nike shoes or whatever it is through the Red Sea without a problem is, you know, it's quite unviable. These larger injustices need to be sorted if you want to remove these kinds of security problems.
There are no Nike stores in Yemen, but 25 in neighbouring Saudi Arabia. The ship with the Nikes made in Vietnam sails on from component parts from around the world, arriving at its Belgian logistics plant and shipped across the region to consumers with little understanding of how far it has come and what has been done to ensure it got there. In countries like Yemen, the circumstances that allow someone to make or buy $190,000 Louis Vuitton sneakers does not exist, a nation where 80% of the population lives below the poverty line. The two worlds live side by side, almost parallel, where the intricate, nuanced supply chains adapt and shape themselves around a world in turmoil, only meeting at the Bab el-Mandeb.